Imagine you are at a point on Earth where the nearest person to you is a cosmonaut on the International Space Station, flying 400 kilometers above your head. Not a person on a neighboring island, not a fisherman on the horizon, a cosmonaut in space. This point exists. It is called Point Nemo, the pole of inaccessibility, and it is located not on a mountaintop, not in a desert, not in the Amazon jungles. It is located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, farther from any land than any other place on the planet. But here is what really makes your blood run cold. It is precisely there, to this most remote point on Earth, that humanity has been dumping its space stations for 50 years. More than 260 vehicles, tons of metal, fuel, radioactive materials. They fall through the atmosphere, burn, explode, and what remains sinks 4,000 meters down to a bottom that almost no one has ever seen. And what if there, at the bottom of the dead center of the ocean, something is happening that we do not even suspect? What if the most isolated place on Earth holds secrets that change our entire understanding of the ocean, life, and even space? Today, we will journey to the point where space meets the abyss, where silence is absolute, where humanity has left its mark without even looking there. Get ready. We begin. The story of Point Nemo began not in the ocean. It began at a computer in 1992 when Croatian-Canadian engineer Hrvoje Lukatela decided to answer a strange mathematical question. Where on Earth is the point most distant from any land? This is not idle curiosity. This is a geometric problem. The planet is a sphere. Continents and islands are scattered across its surface unevenly. Somewhere there must exist a point equidistant from the three nearest land masses, forming the maximum possible distance. Lukatela wrote a program. He loaded the coordinates of all the world's coastlines, every continent, every island, every scrap of land sticking out of the water. The algorithm began searching and found it. 48 degrees, 52 minutes south latitude, 123 degrees, 23 minutes west longitude, South Pacific Ocean, between New Zealand, Chile, and Antarctica. The nearest land, Ducie Island to the north, part of the Pitcairn Archipelago. Distance, 2,688 kilometers, almost like from Moscow to Lisbon. Only around it, nothing, only ocean. Lukatela named the point after Captain Nemo, the hero of Jules Verne, who fled from humanity into the ocean depths on his Nautilus. The name was perfect. Point Nemo, literally, point nobody, a place where there is no one. But Lukatela's discovery was not merely a geographic curiosity, because space agencies already knew about this place. They knew long before 1992. They were using it. Since 1971, when the first Soviet space station Salyut 1 completed its mission, engineers faced a problem: where to drop it. A space station weighs tens of tons. It does not burn up completely in the atmosphere. Debris falls, large debris, burning debris, debris of titanium, steel, toxic materials. They could not be dropped over land. The risk was too great. The ocean was the only option. But not just any ocean. A point was needed where the probability of debris hitting a ship, island, or any place where people might be was reduced to zero. Point Nemo became that place. First fell Salyut 1, then Salyut 5, then Skylab, an American station the size of a house, 77 tons of iron and aluminum. In 1979, it broke apart over Australia and the Indian Ocean, not quite according to plan, but close enough to the inaccessibility zone. Then came Soviet stations of the Salyut series, Mir, dozens of Progress cargo ships, European ATVs, and Japanese HTVs. By 2025, more than 260 spacecraft lie on the bottom around Point Nemo. This is not an exact figure. Many fragments are scattered over hundreds of kilometers. But the center, the epicenter of this cemetery, is precisely there. And soon the largest structure that man has ever built in space will fall there. The International Space Station, 450 tons, the size of a football field. In 2031, when its mission ends, the ISS will be deorbited. It will enter the atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean. It will ignite, break apart, and fall into the waters of Point Nemo. This is the plan. Official, approved by NASA, Roscosmos, ESA, all the space agencies of the world. But here is what no one discusses publicly. What happens to these fragments on the bottom? 4 kilometers down, eternal darkness. Pressure of 400 atmospheres, as if 4 elephants were pressing on every square centimeter of your body. Temperature around 2 degrees Celsius. Almost no oxygen. It would seem a dead zone. But the ocean is never truly dead. To understand what makes Point Nemo so strange, you need to understand how life in the ocean works. On the surface, where there is sunlight, phytoplankton, microscopic algae, converts carbon dioxide into oxygen and organic matter. These algae are eaten by zooplankton. Zooplankton is eaten by fish. Fish are eaten by larger fish. All this is the foundation of the food chain. But phytoplankton needs not only light and carbon dioxide, it needs nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, iron. These elements come from the depths, where ocean currents bring cold, mineral-rich water up to the surface. This is called upwelling. At Point Nemo, there is almost no upwelling. The point is located in the center of the South Pacific Gyre, a giant system of currents that rotates clockwise, forming an isolated water zone. This water does not mix with rich coastal waters. It receives nutrients neither from continents nor from the depths. It is as if locked in a slowly rotating trap. The result, a biological desert. The concentration of chlorophyll, a marker of phytoplankton, in the waters around Point Nemo is among the lowest on the planet. Less life than in some parts of the Sahara. But here is what is truly disturbing. The absence of life on the surface does not mean the absence of life on the bottom, because different laws operate on the bottom. And it is precisely there, into this dark, cold, isolated abyss, that we dump our most advanced technology. Accumulated data push us toward an uncomfortable thought. Perhaps we have turned the most remote place on Earth not simply into a cemetery. Perhaps we have created something completely new there. In 2015,
a research vessel from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography conducted an expedition in waters near Point Nemo. Not directly to the point itself, getting there is extremely difficult and expensive, but close enough to obtain the first real data about this zone. Scientists lowered deep-sea dredges and samplers. They expected to find a bottom typical of central oceanic zones. Soft red silt, rich in iron and manganese that had settled over millions of years. Microscopic radiolarians and diatoms in the sediments. Perhaps a few holothurians, sea cucumbers, slowly crawling along the bottom in search of organic remains. What they found was different. The concentration of metals in the sediments was anomalously high. Not natural deposits, but aluminum, titanium, traces of hydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide, components of rocket fuel. This was not unexpected. Space agencies officially confirm that debris falls here, but the scale was surprising. One sample showed aluminum content 15 times higher than typical for this region. In another, they found particles covered with a film that did not correspond to any known natural process. Chemical analysis showed this was a film of microorganisms, bacteria. Not just bacteria, entire colonies that had covered metal fragments so densely that they formed a biofilm, a layer of microscopic life using the metal as substrate. On Earth, bacteria that feed on metal are known. Iron bacteria oxidize iron. Manganese bacteria, manganese.
But aluminum? Titanium? In such concentrations? On the bottom, where there's practically no organic matter, no light, almost no oxygen? This was strange. But what became truly alarming was another discovery. In 2018, a group of microbiologists from the University of Southern California analyzed the genetic material of microbes found on debris from one of the sunken Progress cargo ships, raised from a depth of 3,800 meters near the Point Nemo zone. Usually, such operations are not conducted. Debris remains on the bottom. But in this case, the ship did not fall quite accurately, and it was raised for analysis. The bacterial genome showed signs of horizontal gene transfer, a process by which microorganisms exchange genetic information directly without reproduction. This is a normal mechanism for bacteria, but the source of some genes turned out to be unknown. The researchers compared the sequences with databases of all known bacteria. There were no matches. The closest relatives were extremophiles living near hydrothermal vents on the depths of the East Pacific Rise, thousands of kilometers from Point Nemo. But even they differed by 12 to 18% of the DNA sequence. This is an enormous difference. For comparison, humans and chimpanzees differ by 1.2%. Where did these bacteria come from? How did they get onto debris from a spacecraft? One hypothesis: they were always there, on the bottom. Ancient microbial communities, relics of past epochs, isolated in the cold waters of the South Pacific Gyre for millions of years. The debris became a new substrate for them, a source of energy, metal, fuel, organic materials from insulation and seals. All this suddenly appeared in their lifeless desert. But there is another hypothesis, more alarming. What if these bacteria arrived with the debris? Spacecraft are not sterile. NASA and other agencies take measures to reduce microbial load, but absolute sterilization does not exist. On the ISS, hundreds of species of bacteria and fungi live. They live on walls, in ventilation systems, on cosmonauts' hands. They are adapted to radiation, vacuum, temperature fluctuations. When a station falls, most of it burns up,
but not all. Some modules, especially central ones, protected by thick walls, can reach the ocean almost intact. Inside them, air, moisture, organic matter, and bacteria. 4 kilometers underwater is not space, but it is an environment where pressure is 400 times atmospheric, temperature is on the verge of freezing, no light. For most organisms, this means immediate death, but not for all. In 2020, Japanese scientists raised sediment samples aged 101 million years from the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. They discovered living bacteria, not spores, not preserved cells, living, capable of reproduction microorganisms that had existed in a state of minimal metabolism for more than 100 million years. If life is capable of this, then what prevents bacteria from space stations from surviving on the bottom of the ocean? But this is only a small fragment of a much stranger picture. In 2021, an oceanographic expedition from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution discovered something that should not have existed in the waters around Point Nemo. Hydrophones, installed to track whale movements and underwater seismic activity, recorded sounds. Low-frequency clicks, regular, repeating, at a frequency of about 52 hertz. They appeared every few hours, always from a depth of 3,500 to 4,200 meters. At first, researchers assumed it was a whale. In the world, there exists one known whale that produces sounds at 52 hertz frequency, the so-called loneliest whale in the world, whose song is too high for blue whales and too low for fin whales. But this whale moves. It migrates along the western coast of North America, crossing thousands of kilometers. The sounds at Point Nemo did not move. They remained in one spot. Marine biologists ruled out whales.
A depth of 4,000 meters is beyond the capabilities of any known marine mammal. Sperm whales, the deepest diving whales, dive to a maximum of 2,000 to 3,000 meters, and only for short periods. And most importantly, at Point Nemo there is simply nothing to eat. No squid, no fish, no plankton. A whale would not survive there longer than a few days. The next hypothesis: geological activity. Underwater volcanoes, plate movement, gas release from cracks in the Earth's crust. All this creates sounds. But this part of the Pacific Ocean is seismically quiet. The nearest active zone, the East Pacific Rise, 2,000 kilometers away. And the sounds were too regular. Nature does not create rhythms with such precision. Then scientists proposed a third version: debris. Metal structures on the ocean bottom can vibrate under the influence of currents. If a hollow metal structure, for example a fragment of a space station with internal compartments, lies at a certain angle, water can pass through it, creating resonance, like when wind blows into a bottle. This explanation seemed reasonable, but it raised another question. How much debris is down there, and how large is it? Official data from space agencies are vague. NASA publishes coordinates of atmospheric entry points, but does not provide precise maps of where exactly debris lies on the bottom. The reason is understandable. The accuracy of ballistic calculations is limited. Atmospheric conditions, entry angle, degree of destruction, all this affects where exactly fragments will fall. The dispersion zone can be from 50 to 200 kilometers in length. This means that on the bottom around Point Nemo lies not a neat cemetery, but a chaotic field of debris, smeared across an area comparable to a small European country. But in 2022, data appeared that began to shed light on the scale of what is happening. Autonomous underwater drones, launched as part of an international project to map the world's ocean floor, passed through several transects through the Point Nemo zone.
They used multi-beam sonar, technology that sends sound pulses and builds a three-dimensional map of bottom relief from reflected signals. At a depth of 3,900 meters, the drones discovered objects, large objects. One of them had a length of about 18 meters and a height above the bottom level of 4 meters. The shape was irregular, but the structure was clearly artificial. Sharp lines, right angles, elements that nature does not create. Nearby, within a radius of a kilometer, another dozen smaller objects. Scattered parts, panels, cylinders. The drones did not approach closely. Their mission was mapping, not detailed inspection. But the data were clear enough. These are remains of a spacecraft. Possibly one of the European Space Agency's ATV cargo ships sunk in 2008-2014, or a fragment of the Mir station, which fell in 2001. But the most shocking discovery is related not to the size of the debris, but to what is happening around them. Sonar data showed a density anomaly within a radius of 50 to 100 meters from large debris. The bottom in these zones was heterogeneous. Not smooth silt, but bumpy, uneven surface, as if something were growing there. Biologists suggested these could be bacterial mats, huge colonies of microorganisms forming structures visible to the naked eye. Such mats are known in places where methane or hydrogen sulfide emerges, where bacteria feed on these gases and form thick layers of biomass. But where would methane or hydrogen sulfide come from at Point Nemo? The answer may lie in the debris themselves. Spacecraft contain many organic materials: plastic, rubber, insulation, seals, even food remains and cosmonaut waste in cargo modules. When these materials reach the bottom, they begin to decompose. In conditions of low oxygen content, an anaerobic environment, decomposition occurs differently than on the surface. Methane, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia are formed. For bacteria, this is a feast.
A source of energy that suddenly appeared in a desert where there was nothing for millions of years. But there is another possibility, even stranger. In 2023, a group of microbiologists from the Max Planck Institute published a study that received almost no press coverage but exploded the scientific community. They discovered that some deep-sea bacteria are capable of using radiation as an energy source. Not photosynthesis, where light energy is converted into chemical energy, but radiosynthesis, a process in which radioactive decay energy splits water molecules, releasing hydrogen, which bacteria use for metabolism. This process was discovered back in 2007 in the Chernobyl reactor, where fungi grew on walls exposed to radiation. But now it was discovered in bacteria on the ocean bottom. And spacecraft contain radioactive materials, radioisotope thermoelectric generators using plutonium-238, detectors based on americium-241, even weakly irradiated electronics components that spent years in space. Most radiation is weak, but for bacteria that have lived in total darkness for millions of years, even a weak energy source is a revolution. Imagine, debris falls to the bottom. Inside, organic matter, metal, traces of radiation. Ancient bacteria that existed in minimal survival mode suddenly gain access to resources. They begin to multiply, form colonies, create biofilms, perhaps even form symbiotic relationships. Some decompose organic matter, others oxidize metal, still others use radiation. This evidence points beyond simple ocean pollution and leads to a frightening thought. We are not simply dumping trash at Point Nemo. We are creating a new ecosystem there. Artificial, deep sea, based not on sunlight, like all other life on Earth's surface, but on the wastes of the space age. And we have no idea what this will lead to. In scientific circles, a theory has already formed explaining what is happening on the bottom of Point Nemo. It is called technogenic chemosynthesis, a process in which artificial materials become the foundation for biological systems analogous to those that exist around hydrothermal vents, but with one critical difference. The energy source is not geological, but created by man. The main components of the theory look like this. First, substrate. Spacecraft debris provides a solid surface in a zone where the bottom is covered with soft silt. Bacteria need surfaces for anchoring and forming colonies. Metal, plastic, ceramic, ideal materials. Second, chemical energy. Decomposition of organic materials, rubber, plastic, insulation, releases methane, hydrogen sulfide, and ammonia. These substances serve as fuel for chemosynthesizing bacteria that do not need sunlight. Third, metals. Aluminum, titanium, iron from debris can be oxidized by bacteria that obtain energy from this process. This is already known to science. Iron bacteria have been doing this for millions of years, but the scale of metal concentration at Point Nemo is unprecedented for natural conditions. Fourth, radiation. Weak sources of radioactive radiation, if they exist in the debris, can support radiosynthesizing organisms. This is a rare but real path to obtaining energy. All this together creates conditions for explosive growth of microbial life in a place that should be dead. But there are alternative explanations. Some scientists claim that the observed effects are exaggerated. Bacterial mats, if they exist, may be temporary, bursts of activity that will fade in a few decades when the organic matter in the debris is completely decomposed. Metal corrodes, but slowly. In 100, 200 years, the debris will turn into rusty skeletons covered with sediment indistinguishable from natural formations. The problem with this explanation is that it does not account for the cumulative effect. Every year, new debris falls into Point Nemo. Every few years, a large vehicle. In 2031, the ISS will fall. This is not a one-time event. In 2018, the Chinese space station Tiangong-1 went out of control and fell unpredictably over the Pacific Ocean. It was fortunate that it did not hit inhabited islands. The ISS is 15 times heavier. Recent advances give us reason to expect that controlled deorbit technology will become more accurate. SpaceX already demonstrates controlled descent of Falcon 9 first stages with accuracy to meters. Applying these technologies to large space objects is the next logical step. But even if everything goes perfectly, the question remains, what will we do next? In the 2030s, construction of new orbital stations is planned. Commercial, Chinese, Indian. Their service life is 15 to 20 years. Then they too will fall. Where? Again to Point Nemo? How much more can be dumped there before it becomes a problem? Not a legal one. The ocean beyond national waters belongs to no one, but an ecological one, biological, perhaps even ethical. Some scientists propose alternatives. One idea is orbital cemeteries, where spent stations remain in high orbits beyond working zones and slowly degrade under the influence of solar radiation and micrometeorites over centuries. But this creates a space debris problem. Another idea is orbital recycling. Dismantle old stations right in space, use metal and components for building new ones. Technically, this is possible, but so far, incredibly expensive. For now, Point Nemo remains the only practical solution. And with each new sinking, we deepen the experiment whose results we will see only in decades. The deepest conclusions emerge when we consider Point Nemo not as an isolated point on the map, but as a mirror reflecting a fundamental contradiction of human civilization. We strive for space. We build stations, launch satellites, dream of Mars and distant stars. But everything we send upward, sooner or later, falls downward. And it falls to a place we chose not because it is suitable, but because it is empty, remote, invisible. Point Nemo is our planetary blind spot, a place we look at only when we need to hide something. But the ocean does not forgive inattention.
In 2023, a group of climatologists from the University of Tasmania published a model that showed something unexpected. The South Pacific Gyre, in whose center Point Nemo is located, is not static. It is slowly shifting. The currents that create the isolation of this zone are changing under the influence of global warming. Over the past 30 years, the center of the gyre has shifted almost 150 kilometers to the northeast. This seems insignificant, but for an oceanic system, this is an enormous rate of change. What does this mean for debris on the bottom? If currents continue to shift, the biological desert zone may decrease. Waters rich in nutrients may begin to penetrate where now there is nothing. And then Point Nemo will cease to be isolated. Imagine microbial communities that evolved on debris for decades suddenly gain access to a larger ecosystem. They begin to spread. Migratory species, plankton, fish larvae, jellyfish, pass through the zone and contact these bacteria. What will happen if organisms adapted to decomposing space materials enter the wider food web? This is not fiction. This is happening right now in other parts of the ocean. In the Pacific Ocean exists the Great Garbage Patch, a zone of plastic waste concentration the size of France. Studies show that unique ecosystems are forming there. Bacteria feeding on plastic, algae growing on floating debris, even new species of small crustaceans that use plastic fragments as substrate. Life does not ask permission. It simply adapts. And if Point Nemo follows the same logic, we may face a situation where an artificial ecosystem created by space debris begins to interact with the ocean's natural biosphere. The consequences are unpredictable. Perhaps nothing will happen. Microbes will remain local. Their populations will fade when resources run out. Or perhaps they will find new niches.
Send it to a friend who looks at the stars, but forgets that beneath their feet is an ocean thousands of meters deep full of mysteries. Thank you for being with me on this journey to the dead center of the ocean. See you in the next episode. And for now, take care of the planet, because even its most remote corners are closer than they seem. See you in the abyss.